am going to tell my kids that is what a superhero looks like. Thank you, Joseph. It is now my honor to introduce Rabbi Abraham Cooper, the Vice Chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom and the Associate Dean and Director of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. A longtime friend of CUFI and activist for Jewish and human rights, Rabbi Cooper oversees the Wiesenthal Center's international social action agenda and worldwide promotion of tolerance and education. I think it's rare at a Christian conference that you hear not one, but two, but three rabbis all before lunch. And so you will be mesmerized by what Rabbi Cooper is about to tell you. Rabbi Cooper is ranked as the 8th most influential rabbi in America by Newsweek, and you'll see why. Welcome, Rabbi Cooper.
I have to warn you, I've been living in Los Angeles for 45 years, but I learned how to drive in Brooklyn. So I see the timer here on the right side, and to me, as a former Brooklynite, that yellow flashing light is a suggestion to speed up. So I'll try to speed up. I'll try to speed up. You know, everyone here has been told that they were going to learn a lot about the inside story of the Abraham Accords. Now, I have not been told to promise such a thing, so therefore, allow me to deliver, not part of my remarks, a quick story about one of the building blocks to the Abraham Accords. So 2 months after the inauguration of then President Trump, my boss, Rabbi Marvin Heyer, and myself found ourselves in the capital of Bahrain and a meeting with King Hamad, His Majesty King Hamad. Now, we've been together for 50 years, and I know Rabbi Heyer is amazing. 2 Oscars, Wiesenthal Center, Museum of Tolerance. He's not too good when it comes to the rules of engagement with royalty. So despite the best efforts of whoever's in charge at palaces to say, this is what you do, you don't do, you don't put your hand out first, et cetera, et cetera. So naturally, when we came out, the entire brain trust of this country was there, everyone. And there was His Majesty, King Hamad. So what does Rabbi Heyer do? King Hamad, so wonderful to meet you. He returned it without batting an eyelash. What does Rabbi Heyer do? He puts his second hand on top of the king's first. And then he did the following. He gave the king the Hebrew blessing, which our rabbis prepared hundreds or thousands of years ago when you're standing with royalty. Later on, my good friend Samir, whose last name I won't use, but Malcolm knows, he asked the person he's known since he's a teenager, Your Majesty, you met plenty of rabbis before, and you know, you guys, you hit it off. What was it about this rabbi that was so amazing? He said, I'll tell you the truth. How many decades have I been king? This is the first time in my life where someone put his hand out to me, not to take something, but to give a blessing. Everyone in this room has an obligation to deepen and strengthen the DNA of peace. And I know you're already ambassadors, you don't need to hear, we say, a Musser schmooze, telling you exactly what you should do. Just be yourselves. You'll know when the opportunity presents itself, and when it doesn't, you'll do what Rabbi Heyer does, you create the opportunity. And then, because I only know Malcolm Hoenlein since I'm 17 years old, and now I'm 72, so I said to myself, look, I'll be speaking about very tough issues. I'm not going to tell any jokes unless Malcolm starts with one. And now he's pivoted to the Japanese thing, but it still works. And I hope all the pastors here will use the appropriate watch. So let me tell you one quick joke, but it was actually inspired late last night, and I bet you everyone here can relate to it. Randy Neal, my new best friend and lifeline from Sacramento, California, okay? God bless him. I don't know what he did, but he had the night shift at Reagan International Airport, which means when he came to pick me up, we were both waiting and praying for that piece of luggage to come off the American Airlines. Now, we've all been there. So my favorite story as it relates to prayer, and you heard from Rabbi Lightstone and you heard from Pastor Hagee, what real prayer can do. Let me share with you a moment of prayer that unfortunately I think each of us, except for Pastor Hagee, of course, has probably had. I went to school at Yeshiva University in northern part of Manhattan, blessed with many things, except not too many trees and absolutely no extra parking spaces. So the story goes that one of the people who was in my smicha class, ordination class, already married, comes home at 10:30 p.m., and he's driving around for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, a half hour. He says, Ribono Shel Olam, God, please, come on, if you'll just get me the parking space, right? I promise I'm gonna be coming to services every morning for the next 3 months. Just then, a car pulls out of the space, and you guessed it, never mind, God, I got the space. I was going to do for some more humorous relief, try to use the clicker. But actually, if our good folks in the back will put up the first visual, and you should take a close look at it. My first point is about Hakarat HaTov, saying thank you. Thank you to CUFI. Thank you to Pastor Hagee for the love of Israel, for leading the charge for the historic decision by President Trump to finally move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. And for your steadfast standing with the Jewish people in our time of need, and not just in Israel. So let me explain, if you can't make it out over there, what you're looking at. I know this is an informed group. I know you know about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, an anti-Semitic movement if there ever was one. So there's something new and evil and pernicious on the horizon. It's called the Mapping Project. The Mapping Project started with Boston. And what you see there, maybe if we scroll down a little bit, you might see it a little bit better. You'll see a map of Boston with hundreds of dots over Boston and the metropolitan area. And in their own definition, the Mapping Project, these are people in Boston and Cambridge who wanted to develop a deeper understanding of local institutions supporting the colonization of Palestine and the harm that we see as linked, such as policing, U.S. imperialism, displacement, and ethnic cleansing, etc., etc. It names names. It names tiny Jewish institutions in small communities. It names Jewish day schools. It's a roadmap for anti-Semitic attacks. Now, who put it up? Well, we know that BDS in Boston is having a debate between the people who say maybe we should take it down and others who say why should we? It's just telling the truth. We've heard that it may have been put up by neo-Nazis. It may have put up by the progressives behind BDS. Actually, most likely it was put up by agents of Iran. You can have your choice of which group did it. But I wanted to come here today to let everyone know just how grateful we are. Rabbi Lightstone's entire presentation was, we have to be Abrahams, we have to be Sarahs, and we know that it comes with a price. Boston United Pentecostal Church is described in this mapping project, has hosted events run by the Christian Zionist group Christians United for Israel, CUFI. The church hosted CUFI's propaganda talk, Why Israel?, which CUFI gave across the U.S. The advertisement for the talk states, learn why you should stand with Israel, what you can do to defend Israel. In the U.S., Christian Zionists constitute some of the largest forces supporting the state of Israel, at least numerically, for reasons that are anchored, you ready, in a perverse combination of anti-Arab racism, Islamophobia, and in many cases, anti-Jewish racism. The character and scope of Christian support for Zionism in the U.S. constitutes a reminder of Zionism's foundations, which were profoundly shaped by white supremacy, anti-Jewish racism, and European colonialism. That site is up as we speak, the mapping project. And so I'm here again on behalf of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, our 400,000 members across the U.S., first and foremost, to just say thank you, in the words of all the previous speakers, Chazak ve'amatz, continue to be strong. Your strength is our strength. If we can then go to the next 2 points, I'll go through it very quickly. I've been told not to act rabbinically now, so let me go fast. So, U.S. hate crimes. Targeted religious hate crimes in the U.S. This is FBI stats. Total in 2019, 1,521. Anti-Semitic, 953. You all know the percentages of how many American Jews there are. It's a staggering statistic. It's more than both anti-Muslim and anti-Asian crimes combined. And it took place, for the most part, during COVID. In 2020, over 8,000 incidents, again, 683 anti-Semitic. It's not an area we want to lead. I'm so grateful that Joey Morgan agreed to come here today. It was so important, and it is so important for all of us who are educators and pastors and rabbis to make sure we get past the statistics and put a human face on what it is that we're dealing with. Joey's our neighbor. He's your neighbor. And we learn from him the price of being an innocent victim of hate and the courage that you find, please God, to deal with it. But in New York City, in 2020 and 2021, and so far this year, the total number of anti-Semitic attacks outweigh all the other hate crimes in New York City combined, all the other targeted communities combined. Let me move to my main point. I want to focus on 2 statements that I heard from our institution's namesake, Simon Wiesenthal, who, like the grandfather of that soldier, was liberated on May 5th, 1945, from Mauthausen concentration camp by the United States Army. He was too weak to stand to say thank you. He weighed, at the time, 90 pounds. He and his wife, Sela, lost 89 members of their family. In 1980, I had the honor to accompany the person who became the fearless Nazi hunter during a series of lectures in the Midwest in our nation. At each stop, Mr. Wiesenthal was asked by a younger member of the audience, too young to have been affected to remember World War II and the Nazi Holocaust. Mr. Wiesenthal, could the Holocaust happen again, they asked. His answer, if a society has a big crisis. If you have bigotry, if you have access to technology, anything is possible. Mr. Wiesenthal spoke about the power of technology 2 decades before the internet, and now the social media, which has come to revolutionize and dominate our world. He added, back in 1492, if today's technology had been available, no Jew would have survived in Spain, no Catholic in England, no Protestant in France. And then this question, were you surprised how many Nazis there were in the 1930s and the 1940s? No, I was only surprised by how few anti-Nazis there were. Look, we will never be able to reach the lone wolf domestic terrorists who murdered Christians praying in a church, or the young anti-Semite who chose to target a July 4th parade, which was populated by so many of the local Jews in the Chicago area. That murderous attack. So for my few minutes here today, I can't go into the psychosis of hate. I want to focus on a different question. How do we make more anti-haters? Another true confession. I only do this in front of Christians, Pastor Hagee. It's kind of. So Pastor Hagee spoke before about the trembling cup. Well, for the last hour and a half, I've been the trembling rabbi, praying that Pastor Hagee, who's encyclopedic in the Old and New Testament, would not quote the same verses. And then holding my breath when Rabbi Lightstone spoke. And then finding out that the lieutenant governor, who I'll now call Hadassah for the rest of her term, she was quoting scriptures left and right. And then, of course, my teacher, mentor, and friend, Malcolm. It's been a very tough hour and a half, Pastor. Thank God, I'm choosing to quote from the book of Numbers. Sefer Bamidbar. In Hebrew, it means the trek in the desert, but the English is Numbers. It's called Numbers, I believe, because the early narrative of the 4th book of the Bible, of the Torah, deals with counting, with the census of the Israelites. And God tells Moses, very interesting, Se'u et Rosh B'nai Yisrael. I'll translate it literally later. But he basically was telling Moses, go out and count the Israelites. Now, I'm old enough to remember that as a child, I would count over and over again my nickels, dimes, and occasional quarters gifted to me by a grandparent, or, when my prayers were answered, on the sidewalk. God loved his people and wanted Moses to count them multiple times. Yet we learn later in Jewish history that when King David counted the Jews, 70,000 of them died. God, we're told, was displeased. As the brilliant Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explains, we have to be very careful when we count. Generals count their troops. If some are killed, they order up some more soldiers. Frankly, their job is to fill the void. Individual soldiers too often are just numbers. To Stalin, to Mao, to Xi, citizens were and are reduced to numbers. To Hitler, numbers on an arm was the first humanizing step for Jews before their genocidal mass murders. Rabbi Sachs identifies two paths available today to young people, and they sound awfully alike. One is individualism, and the other is individuality. Individualism is all about capital M, capital E, me, being selfish, standing autonomously, cut off from community, disinterested except for how I feel and how my feelings are provoked or assuaged based on the situation. Individuality, on the other hand, is what we should all strive for. No cookie-cutter children who are taught only by rote, but generations that are inspired by example and who are reminded at every opportunity they were created in God's image. God told Moses and us, especially when you're counting, don't forget that humans aren't just digits. Se'u et Rosh B'nai Yisrael. Lift up the head of each and every member of the nation that you are about to count. And what is the formula to win over young people stuck in the phony world of phony online friends? Lead by example. And here's the good news. It's a very short quote from the Bible. It's one that we sometimes aver our heart, if not our eyes, from. You all know it. Micha, chapter 6. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? God bless you all.